Keeping up with the tradition of this series, in the previous video I talked about the most controversial albums that I know, and in this video we're going to be talking about the most controversial albums that you know. In case you're unaware of how this works, I'm going to be talking about the controversial albums that you guys recommended me in the previous video. And I've kept that tradition alive in this series ever since I started. However, I need to break the rules hopefully just this one time, because when I originally uploaded the most controversial albums that I know, I felt like for the past few days when it was uploaded, there was an album I forgot to include and it was killing me, but I just recently remembered it before making this video. So think of it with this inclusion I'm about to say as it's a prologue inclusion to the previous video. But again, just my personal pick here, and then we'll get to the albums that you guys consider to be the most controversial. But I forgot to include the 1995 full-length album by Roki Vulovic, Black Bomber. For those who are unaware, this is an album that's in the style of turbo folk, which had somewhat, I guess, of a music scene in the early to mid 90s, and while technically I guess you could still play it, it's primarily focused in that specific time period. In that same time period in Serbia, where this individual resides in when making these albums, Serbia was in quite a handful of wars in the surrounding countries of its areas, such as Bosnia and Croatia. As most would think, when it comes to winning a war, you need supplies, troops, armory, the whole 9 yards. But another important key factor you need is morale support. And that's where turbo folk and all of the artists that play in the style come forth here with this controversy, because it's all about morale support for the troops. And when you pay attention to how the music's being played, the songwriting, and the overall lyrical themes, it has this super ultra, and I mean ultra, nationalist vibe from this very prideful keyboards that come through, it's very upbeat sounds that have like this grand triumphant feeling, and the lyrical themes that all have to do basically, even with the title track Black Bomber, that he's basically flexing over the fact that his country is superior to the enemy forces, that you shouldn't fuck with Serbians, and if you do, you're basically wrapping a noose around your neck. And it gets all the more outlandish when you look at the music videos that they did, where it has the artists singing in the army forces in their music videos, and there are shots of basically the tanks and gunmen blowing up buildings in the sense of like war crimes, again to just flex how powerful their army was for morale support. And obviously if you're Bosnian or any of the enemy forces to that of Serbia, you're going to be quite offended at the fact that there is music basically saying, you suck and we're going to fuck you up. But to the Serbian forces, especially the ones playing in the turbo folk scene, to them, that was the whole point. So if you got offended and upset, to them, all the more power to them. So when it comes to controversy, it might not be that talked about, because it seems like wars like that aren't really brought up all that much in world history. But yeah, it's something that exists in this world, and it's rare that I see people even know of this. Okay, with that out of the way, now let's finally talk about the albums that you guys commented to be the most controversial. And like always, I like bringing up the album that was brought up the most, and god damn, had you people didn't let up with telling me about this album consistently, that being Scorpions with their album Virgin Killer. Its main controversy is right up there, full front and center with the album artwork, which yes, I'm trying my best to use the most censored version that I could find, but the whole album has to do with like losing your innocence and obviously your virginity in this sense. And I get that because sex scenes in music is nothing new. It's been around for decades and it's going to keep going for decades to follow. That's just obvious. But why on God's green earth did they decide to use a 10-year-old for the album artwork, and this 10-year-old is like basically naked? in the album artwork, and the whole point of it was for shock value and to show them that they don't hold back and it's all about losing your innocence. Alright, cool. But why couldn't you just use like a regular 18-year-old person to display those themes to make it, I don't know, legal in a sense? So, yeah, just, again, I really don't know what they're thinking at any point in their minds to use a minor to showcase losing your virginity. David Allan Coe, 18 X-rated hits, is a country album released back in 1990, and again, a lot of you guys were telling me about this album, and in terms of lyrical themes and structure, it's very similar to that of the Johnny Rebel album I brought up in the previous video, but the difference is really not much with the lyrical themes other than the attitude, where Johnny Rebel was being serious as it was a rebellion against the civil rights movement and he was pro-segregationist, where David Allan Coe with this album, I guess in his defense, if you want to say that, there's some self-awareness just solely because of the album title. It's X-rated, giving me the sense that at least he knows, like, hey, this is some fucked up stuff, because usually when it goes to, I don't know, the parental rating, it's G, PG, then PG-13, then R, and then after R-rated is like X-rated, where you have to be like, I don't know, like to the 18 or 21-year-old level to just kind of even perceive any R out there. So I get the fact that there's some self-awareness there, but goddamn, just looking at the song titles and hearing some of the music, it's like, dude, I get it. You want to have fun. You don't want to be taken seriously on this album. It was just, you know, for, I guess, shits and giggles and shock value, but really pushing the limits on the topics, I guess you could say, on the album. So, again, it's kind of like I stated, Johnny Rebel, but some self-awareness, like dark humor with it. Brujeria, Matando, Güeros, which I feel like I'm still saying the last word wrong, so apologies for that. But these guys are a death grind band based out of Los Angeles, California, and I only know of them because of the controversy attached with them. For starters, with the album artwork, it was censored on day one by the record label, which I believe was Roadrunner at the time, and the censored out artwork is just nothing really other than the band logo. And don't hold this against me, but if memory serves me right, I think I heard from somewhere or someone, and I know I'm giving off like just trust me bro vibes here, but I remember hearing that the band actually was getting investigated by the CIA for the album artwork, thinking it was legit, mainly because the band themselves portrayed them to be a satanic cartel gang, and the lyrical themes throughout the whole album have to do with like black magic, Satanism, violence, and again this like cartel gang lifestyle that they portrayed that had like this anti-American like themes going on, especially with their viewpoints on immigration between the United States and Mexico at the time. But it turns out that was just really all a gimmick for shock value and like the message they had towards the United States at the time. So while it is cool in terms of themes, how they portrayed themselves, and they own the image really well, it all turned out to be a gimmick. Leftover Crack, Fuck the World Trade. These guys are a hardcore punk band that pretty on the nose here with the album title and the imagery here. Now, if memory serves me right, this album was released back either 2004, 2005, only a few short years after the 9/11 attacks. And if you know anything about Leftover Crack with their lyrical themes, they have very strong anarchist viewpoints. They're very anti-capitalist. Really, they're just anti-anything of the social norms of the United States. So obviously with the time period of this release and just their overall themes, the public at the time, who at least knew who Leftover Crack is and was, really didn't take too kindly to it. And from what I read, which was kind of funny, retail stores pulled out from selling their albums at their stores like Best Buy, Target, and Walmart. Which, I mean, if you know anything about Leftover Crack and their viewpoints on like anti-consumerism and anti-capitalism, that was basically a favor to them with their social viewpoints, which I find quite ironic in that sense. But yeah, just from the time period alone, you can definitely tell, at least from the social norms of the United States, people didn't take too kindly to this. Charles Manson, Lie, the Love, and Terror Cult, which this is pretty self-explanatory as to why it's in here. And I gotta admit, I'm kind of ashamed at myself that I didn't include this in the previous video from my knowledge, but hey, whatever, we're here and we're talking about it now. But Charles Manson, a very, very infamous individual that led a cult known as the Manson family in the late 60s, and I know there are people in a sense that sympathize with him because he didn't get a fair trial after the charges of the conspiracy of murder to that of the actress being Sharon Tate in 1969. However, for the album Lie, the Love, and Terror Cult, it was recorded between 1968 and 1969, and it plays in the style of music of like country rock and folk rock, and it was released to the public in March of 1970, only about half a year after the murder of Sharon Tate. As you can imagine, having the knowledge of the Manson family come forth to the public more and more with these trials, and seeing an album with Charles Manson's face on it, with him playing the music, which I'm pretty sure the lyrical themes aren't anything offensive other than it's kind of like just a narrative depiction of like what it's like to be in the Manson family cult. The real problem here is that it's being done by this very infamous person that obviously the public had no desire to find any positive feelings towards, other than nowadays he kind of has like this cult following because people here in America for some reason have a fascination with anything to do with serial killers. But I can only imagine when it was originally released in 1970, just the backlash this got just solely off of the album artwork alone and the fact that it's Charles Manson to begin with. G.G. Allin, everything, because that's what a lot of you guys were commenting. There isn't a particular album of his that's like really infamous, it's just G.G. Allin himself is controversial and infamous. So basically anything he touched, controversy falls right after it, and it mainly has to do with just him as a person, how he was in live shows with all the violence and just explicit ways, I guess, of expressing himself, with defecating on the audience like in every show and just causing bare knuckle fights among the audience. So it's just really, when you think of any of his works, you immediately think of those events. And he's very brash, very in your face. I know he was, I believe, on Jerry Springer at one point, and it just really ignites all the more just chaotic energy that he radiates. So I really don't feel like I can say anything that hasn't been said about this individual to begin with, but I will also include as an honorable mention Anal Cunt, as you guys also brought these guys up a lot, but they're heavily inspired by their attitude and antics from G.G. Allin. Mentors, You Axed For It, a band that is deemed to be considered as their music style of rape rock that conservative Christian congressmen were not too kind to this band and tried censoring them left and right in any which way possible. Obviously the lyrical themes weren't too kind to women, as it's often criticized in this very pro-misogynist way. Again, another group that was featured on Jerry Springer back when, you know, Jerry Springer had more of like serious topics, that they kind of like, again, played along with the themes of what this band's trying to represent. And I feel like because of the controversy and all the explicit nature that they just have front and center with their image and just themes, it kind of gave them somewhat of a following because they just owned up to it. Which, again, with a lot of these groups I'm talking about, and really any controversy to begin with, it's not always like a bad thing in terms of like, I don't know, traffic for a band, because it gets people talking about them. And Mentors, like everything else I've talked about and anything you could possibly think of, kind of uses that to their advantage. Death in June, Brown Book, will be the last inclusion for this video. And I saw this coming a mile away that you guys would include Death in June, because when you look at anything of their works at face value, it looks very sketchy. When you have like a Totenkopf skull on the album artwork, the lyrical themes have a lot of like this far right-leaning kind of viewpoint that it kind of gives off. And again, at face value, it looks very sketchy. And I'm not trying to straw man or try to persuade you otherwise here, but when you look at interviews and try to understand just Death in June and obviously Douglas P. as a whole, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. For example, I know he's always had fascination with World War II, and he kind of does this in a narrative sense, I guess, where you start wondering, should Douglas P. be censored and scrutinized just solely because he has a narrative interest in these themes? Just using symbols like, again, a Totenkopf, should he automatically be considered to be, you know, fascist and like far right leaning? Should these symbols have just such great power just off of just looking at them? I guess it's like kind of some of the themes and ideas that he tries to bring forth to the table, especially with the albums that he did in the late 80s and early 90s. With that all being said though, again, if you want nothing to do with Death in June, you just don't want to dive into the kind of like very, again, touchy subject matter that he presents forth, I'm not going to, you know, scrutinize you or anything like that. But again, it kind of just raises a lot of questions as to what exactly you can do in art that should be deemed as acceptable, and kind of pushing some limits in terms of thought and creativity, I guess, in terms of themes. But again, with Death in June, with the ideas and themes he plays around with Douglas P., there's always going to be controversy like that follows him wherever he goes with these ideas, and that's just kind of like how I look at it personally. But again, Death in June, Brown Book, just at face value, obviously, it's controversial. And that'll do it for this video, guys. Like always, links provided to everything I talked about will be in the description below. Again, really curious to know what are albums that you find to be controversial. I only touched upon a handful, again, the ones I saw the most in the previous video. So again, if I ever do a follow-up to any of these videos that I've done in this series, I might do so, and the ones that you include might be in those videos. So again, really curious to know what are albums that you find to be controversial. And yeah, like always, guys, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.